Clara Whitmore pressed both palms flat against the kitchen table and stared at the train ticket her father had just placed there like a verdict. She did not cry. She had used up her tears years ago. She picked it up, folded it, put it in her apron pocket, while her sister laughed and her father looked away. They thought sending her to a stranger's ranch was a joke. They had no idea they were sending her straight to the man who would change everything. If this story speaks to your heart, please subscribe and follow along to the very end. And drop a comment. What city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Clara Whitmore did not look up when her father sat down across from her. She already knew what was coming. She had known for 3 days, ever since she'd overheard Mrs. Hooper's voice through the kitchen window carrying the name Callahan, and the words lonely, and needs help, and nobody decent would go. She had known, and she had waited, and she had said nothing, because saying something in the Whitmore house had never once changed anything. Her father set the train ticket on the table. "Monday," he said. "Harlan County. The Callahan Ranch needs a housekeeper." Clara picked up the ticket. "Read it. Set it down." "How long?" she said. "Long as they'll have you." He didn't look up from his supper. "Which knowing you might not be long." From across the table, Delia laughed that bright, weightless laugh she'd been using as a weapon since they were girls. "Lord Daddy, what does that poor man owe you?" Clara folded the ticket, put it in her apron pocket, stood up and took her plate to the basin. She did not slam it. She did not cry. She did not give either of them the satisfaction of knowing the words had landed. She had learned that a long time ago. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed and opened the small leather ledger she kept tucked beneath her mattress, the one she'd started at 15 when she realized nobody else in the Whitmore house was going to keep the accounts straight. She looked at the numbers, the margins, the careful columns she'd built out of nothing with no help because the alternative was watching everything fall apart. She thought about Monday. She was afraid. She was going to go anyway, not because she had a choice. She understood clearly that she did not. But because somewhere underneath everything the Whitmore family had piled on top of her over 26 years, something still lived. Something that had not yet agreed with their assessment of her. Something stubborn and quiet that said not yet. Not yet. Not yet. She closed the ledger. She put it back under the mattress. She started packing. Sunday she spent making practical preparations, which was the only kind she knew how to make. 2 dresses, her boots, her wool coat, the ledger, a bundle of herbs she grew herself, yarrow, lavender, peppermint, because knowing how to tend sickness was a kind of power that didn't require permission. Her mother's Bible unopened for years, the hairpin she used on pump mechanisms. She packed nothing that wasn't useful. Delia appeared in the doorway in the evening and watched her fold the wool coat with the bright, curious eyes of a girl who had never needed to be useful a day in her life. "You nervous?" Delia asked. "No," Clara said. "You should be." Delia leaned against the doorframe. "Nobody knows anything about this man, and nobody decent would go out there alone with him. That's what everyone's saying." Clara set the coat in the bag. She straightened up. She looked at her sister directly. "Nobody decent was asked," she said. "Good night, Delia." Delia left. Clara sat on the edge of her bed in the quiet and looked at her packed bag and let herself feel the fear properly, all of it, the full weight, and then she breathed it out and stood up. Fear was information. It was not instruction. The train from Willow Creek to the Harlan County Junction took 4 hours and 40 minutes. Clara sat by the window the whole way. She watched Montana pass the grass, the sky, the sheer size of a world she had barely seen outside the borders of one small town. She thought about what Mrs. Hooper had said. Proud man. Stubborn. The kind that had rather let a thing rot than ask for help. She thought about her father. You've survived worse. Both things were probably true. At the junction, a boy of about 15 was waiting with a buckboard. Rory, the rancher's errand hand, friendly in the uncomplicated way of boys who haven't yet learned to be guarded. He talked for most of the 7 miles to the ranch the Callahan name, the land, the cattle. When she asked what Ethan Callahan was like, Rory went quiet for a moment and chose his words with visible care. "He don't yell," Rory said. "Pays on time. Works harder than anybody on the property." A pause. "He just don't talk much. Not about himself." "What happened to him?" Clara asked. Rory glanced at her sideways. "He had someone. Few years back. She left." He looked back at the road. "After that he just closed up, like a house that's been shuttered." Clara said nothing. She looked at the road ahead and thought about shuttered houses, about what happened to them when nobody opened the windows. They fell apart quietly, from the inside. The ranch came into view around a long bend, and Clara's first impression was of a place that had been good once and was holding on by the strength of one man's stubbornness. The main house was large and had clearly been fine, but the porch boards were rotted in sections. A shutter hung crooked. The kitchen garden beside the house was gone to weeds. The barn, though, was solid. The fence lines were straight. The cattle in the distance were well kept. How was tending what mattered, she thought, and letting the rest go. She understood that. Rory pulled the wagon to a stop. Clara climbed down herself before he could offer a reflex so deep it was nearly structural and stood in the yard with her bag. The front door opened. Ethan Callahan was not what she had built in her head. She had assembled a picture from Rory's descriptions and Mrs. Hooper's gossip. A man made narrow by grief, somewhere between middle age and old, carrying 4 years of solitude, like a pack he'd forgotten to set down. The man who came through that door was 32 years old and built like someone who had spent those years in hard physical work, broad through the chest, long in the leg, with hands that were calloused and completely steady. Dark hair pushed back under a worn hat, a face that had weathered things and come through them. He stopped on the porch. He looked at her. Not the way her father looked at her, calculating, dismissing. Not the way the men in Willow Creek looked at her, or more precisely failed to look at her. He looked at her directly, like she was a person who had arrived at his property and he was making an honest accounting of that fact. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Callahan," she said. He came down the porch steps and stopped 6 feet from her and took off his hat, not with a flourish, just as a plain matter of courtesy, and held it against his chest. "You eat," he said. "On the train." He nodded, glanced at her bag. "Rory'll show you your room, east-facing. I cleaned it out best I could." A pause. "It ain't much." "I don't need much," she said. He looked at her one more moment, that direct, unreadable look, and then he said, "Supper's at 6." He put his hat back on and walked toward the barn. Clara stood in the yard and watched him go. He had not smiled. He had not been warm. But he had looked at her like a person, and he had taken off his hat. Those two things, small as they were, sat in her chest like something she hadn't expected to find. The room was exactly what he'd said, not much. Brass-framed bed-clean mattress, one window overlooking the pasture, a folded towel on the end of the bed, a small pitcher of water on the nightstand. He'd prepared it. Not much, but prepared. Clara unpacked with the methodical care she gave every practical task. She hung her dresses, set her herbs on the windowsill, tucked the ledger under the mattress the way she always did. Then she went to find the kitchen. The pantry was a catastrophe. Not filthy, he was too orderly for that, but stocked in the random bachelor way of a man who bought whatever was available and ate whatever was fastest. Tins of beans enough for a siege. Good coffee stored properly. Potatoes going soft in the corner. A side of salt pork that needed using before the week was out. No flour, no sugar, no cornmeal, no dried herbs. Clara stood in the pantry doorway and looked at it without judgment, just accurately, and then she went to find paper and pencil. She sat at the kitchen table and wrote out what the pantry needed, organized by priority costs noted in the margin. Then a week's meal plan based on what was available. Then 3 repairs. The kitchen needed a hinge, a broken chair leg, a gap in the baseboard that would be an invitation to mice come autumn. She was on her second page when boots sounded on the porch. Ethan came through the kitchen door. He stopped when he saw her. He looked at the papers spread in front of her. "What's that?" he said. Pantry inventory, she said. Supply list, weekly meal plan. She turned the pages toward him. The salt pork needs to be used this week, it won't keep. And that chair in the corner has a broken leg. Someone's going to get hurt on it. He stood in the doorway and looked at the papers. Then he looked at her. Something shifted in his face. You do this for every kitchen, he said. First thing, she said. You can't plan if you don't have numbers. He pulled out this good chair and sat down. He read the supply list, carefully, not skimming. He turned to the second page. Read that too. This is accurate, he said. It should be, she said. I was careful. Where'd you learn to keep accounts? I taught myself, she said. My family's books were a mess, and nobody else was going to fix them. He set the papers down. He looked at her in that direct, steady way. I'll have Rory take the list to town Thursday, he said. Anything missing, add it before then. Yes, sir, she said. He stood, folded the papers into his shirt pocket like they were worth keeping. He was almost to the door when he stopped. Miss Whitmore. Yes, the chair with the broken leg. He didn't turn around. I know about it. Don't sit in it. I'll fix it, she said. He turned then, looked at her. You sure? He said. I've fixed chairs before, she said. He nodded once. He went out the back. Clara listened to his boots on the porch until the sound faded. Then she got up and went to find the scrap pile by the barn. Supper was salt pork and potatoes, the best she could do, but she found half-dead sage in the kitchen window box and made a pan gravy that had actual flavor. Rory ate like a boy who hadn't seen a real meal in weeks. Ethan ate steadily and without comment. At the end of the meal, he pushed his plate back and said, "That was good." 2 words. Rory said, "He never says that unless he means it, ma'am." Ethan gave the boy a look. Rory went back to his coffee. Clara cleared the plates. She was drying the last dish when she heard it. A sound from the sitting room, the particular sound of a desk drawer being opened, then closed, then opened again. She set the dish down. She stood very still in the kitchen and listened. The drawer closed a final time. Silence. Then Ethan's boots on the floor moving toward the stairs. Stopping. "Miss Whitmore," he said from the hallway. "Yes," she said. A pause long enough that she turned to look at him through the doorway. Howe was standing at the bottom of the stairs, with one hand on the newel post, and something in his face that she hadn't seen there before. Not quite trouble. More like the expression of a man who has just found something he thought he'd lost, and isn't yet certain whether finding it is good news or not. "The ledger in the sitting room," he said. "The account book. Did you look at it?" "No," she said. "I saw it. I didn't open it." He looked at her for a moment. "Why not?" he said. She met his eyes. "Because it wasn't mine to open yet," she said. The hallway was quiet. Something moved through his face, slow, complicated, like weather changing direction. "Good night, Miss Whitmore," he said. "Good night, Mr. Callahan," she said. He went upstairs. Clara stood in the kitchen alone and looked at the doorway where he'd been standing. Yet she had said. She hadn't planned to say it. It had come out of her the way true things sometimes did before she could decide whether she was ready to mean them. She turned back to the basin. She finished the dishes. She banked the stove. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the summer night, the cattle distant, the wind in the grass, the enormous quiet of a world that had more room in it than Willow Creek had ever let her believe. She thought about the word yet. She thought about a man who read a supply list like it mattered and folded it into his pocket like it was worth keeping. She thought about a room that wasn't much but had been prepared. She was still afraid. But the fear was different now. It was no longer the fear of a woman being sent somewhere she wasn't wanted. It was the fear of a woman who was beginning very quietly, very carefully to want something for the first time in a long time, and who understood with every practical bone in her body that wanting something was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. She closed her eyes. Outside, Montana went on being enormous and indifferent and full of possibility. She let it. The third week began with a horse that wouldn't be touched. Clara heard it before she saw it. A sound from the barn that was wrong in the way that wrong sounds always are, pitched too high and too desperate. The kind of sound that stops a person mid-step. She set down the bucket she was carrying and went to the barn door and looked in. Ethan was in the far stall with a roan mare that had come in 2 days ago from the neighboring Haskell spread a trade of some kind that Rory had mentioned, but not explained. The mare was trembling. Not the trembling of cold or sickness, but the trembling of an animal that had learned to expect pain from human hands. She had her haunches pressed to the back corner of the stall, and her eyes were rolling white, and she was making that sound, that high, desperate, wrong sound every time Ethan moved. I wasn't moving much. He was standing absolutely still, one hand out, not reaching, just present. His voice was so low Clara could barely hear it from the doorway. "Easy," he was saying. "Easy now. Nobody's going to hurt you. Easy." The mare didn't believe him. Her whole body said she didn't believe him. Clara watched. Ethan didn't push. He didn't reach further. He just stood there, patient as stone, hand out, talking in that low, steady voice. 5 minutes. 10. Clara lost track. The mare's trembling slowed gradually, the way a storm slows, not all at once, but in degrees, the gusts coming further apart, until there was more stillness than shaking. She didn't come to his hand, but she stopped making the sound. Ethan lowered his arm very slowly. He took one step back. He let her have the space. "Tomorrow," he said quietly to the horse. "We'll try again tomorrow." He turned and saw Clara in the doorway. He didn't startle. He just looked at her for a moment with that steady look. "How long have you been there?" he asked. "A while," she said. He came out of the stall and latched it behind him. He looked back at the mare, who was watching him with those wide, wary eyes. "She came from a bad situation," he said. "Haskell's boy thought rough handling was the way to break a horse fast." He was quiet. "It ain't." "No," Clara said. "It isn't." He looked at her. "You know horses." "I know what fear looks like," she said, "in anything that's been handled wrong." He held her gaze for a beat longer than he usually did. Then he picked up the grain bucket and went to the next stall without another word. But that night at supper, he passed the bread to her first, before himself, before Rory, which he had not done before. It was a small thing. She was learning that with him, small things were the language. She took the bread and said nothing, but she noticed. The accounting work had become a nightly ritual without either of them formally agreeing to it. After supper, while Rory went to tend the evening animals, Clara would bring the ledger to the kitchen table, and Ethan would sit across from her with his coffee, and they would go through the entries together. He would explain what a figure referred to a particular cattle sale, a fence repair, a payment to the seasonal crew, and she would record it properly and slowly. Page by page, the chaos of his financial records was becoming something that made sense. How was a better businessman than his books had suggested? The ranch was not only surviving, it was, if the numbers were right, doing quietly well. The problem was that he'd never been able to see that clearly, because the numbers were buried under 4 years of disorganized grief. "You were profitable last winter," she told him one evening 2 weeks into the ledger project. "Better than profitable. You brought in more than any 2-year period I can find in here." He looked at the page. He didn't say anything. "You didn't know," she said. It wasn't a question. "I knew we made it through," he said. "I didn't know we did better than that." Clara looked at the column she'd corrected and retotaled 3 times to be sure. "You've been living like you're one bad season from losing everything," she said. "Based on these numbers, you've got more cushion than you think." He was quiet for a long time. "That changes things," he said finally. "It should," Clara said. He looked up from the ledger. He looked at her. "Why did nobody—" He stopped, started again. "I had a man in town handle the books for 2 years after my mother passed. He never told me this." Clara kept her voice neutral. "Did he show you his work?" "No, he just gave me numbers." "Then either he didn't look carefully," she said, "or he gave you numbers that suited him." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man recalculating something he'd believed to be fixed. His brother bought the Coulter parcel last spring, Ethan said slowly. Land that borders my east pasture. I could have bid on that land. He set down his coffee cup. I had the money to bid on that land. Clara said nothing. She let him arrive at his own conclusions. He pushed back from the table. He stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her. If I'd known, he said. You know now, Clara said. The Coulter parcel's not going anywhere in the next year. The family that bought it isn't ranchers they'll likely resell. She paused. If you wanted to pursue it. He turned around. He looked at her across the kitchen. How do you know that? He asked. Rory talks, she said. I listen. Something crossed his face, not quite a smile, but the shape of one, the ghost of one. It was the first time she'd seen anything close to it, and it changed him entirely, just for a second, before it was gone again. You're useful, he said. It came out blunt. She suspected he hadn't meant it to be a compliment exactly, just an honest statement of observed fact. But it was the first time in as long as she could remember that she'd been called useful by someone whose opinion carried weight. Thank you, she said, and she meant it. The trouble started on a Thursday. It came the way trouble usually came, not with a declaration, but with a wagon. Clara was in the kitchen garden when she heard wheels on the road, and when she straightened and looked, she saw a buggy coming up the track. Not Rory's supply wagon, which she knew by sound, but something lighter and faster, and carrying 2 passengers. She watched it come to a stop in the yard. The woman who climbed down first was perhaps 60, dressed finely for a ranch visit with the particular posture of someone who had arranged themselves for viewing. The man with her was younger, mid-30s, well-dressed in a way that said merchant rather than rancher, with the easy smile of a man who believed his smile was his most useful tool. Clara set down her gardening and went to the yard. Good afternoon, she said. Can I help you? The woman looked at her with the bright, assessing eyes of a person cataloging information. We're here to see Ethan Callahan. I'm Miriam Lawson from Harlan Creek. This is my son, Gerald. I'll let him know you're here, Clara said. Can I tell him what it's about? Miriam Lawson's smile was practiced and gave nothing away. Tell him it's a social call. We've been meaning to visit for some time. Clara went to find Ethan. She found him at the south fence, and when she told him who was in the yard, something happened to his face that she hadn't seen before. Not quite dread. More like the look of a man who has been expecting a particular piece of weather and has just seen it arrive on the horizon. The Lawsons, he said. You know them. I know of them. He pulled off his gloves. He looked at her. Miriam Lawson has a daughter, Margaret. She's been to this ranch twice before, both times with her mother, and both times with the clear intention of... He stopped. He chose different words. Miriam Lawson has ideas about how things should be arranged. Clara understood him. Do you want me to say you're unavailable? She asked. He thought about it for a moment. Then he shook his head. No, I'll come. He looked at Clara. Stay close. She didn't ask why. She just fell into step beside him as they walked back to the house. Miriam Lawson's smile widened when she saw Ethan coming, and then it adjusted almost imperceptibly when she registered Clara walking beside him. Ethan, she said warmly, it's been too long. Mrs. Lawson, Ethan said. He touched his hat. Gerald, we were in the area and thought we'd pay our respects, Gerald said. His eyes had gone to Clara with open curiosity. I don't believe we've met your... He paused on the word with deliberate lightness. Housekeeper. Clara Whitmore, Clara said before Ethan could speak. She kept her voice even. From Willow Creek. Charming, Miriam said in the tone of someone for whom charming was not a compliment. She turned back to Ethan. We've brought some things from town. Margaret wanted to send something. She's been thinking of you. She produced a basket from the buggy seat. Preserves and wrapped bread tied up with ribbon. Ethan took the basket with the expression of a man receiving a peace treaty from a nation he hadn't declared war on. That's kind of her, he said. She'd have come herself, Miriam said. But she had obligations in town. You know how it is. A pointed pause. She does ask after you, often. Ethan said, tell her I'm well. You should tell her yourself. We're having a gathering Saturday evening. Nothing formal, just neighbors and friends. You should come. Another pause, another adjustment of the smile. Alone would be perfectly fine, of course. The word alone was aimed like a dart. Ethan glanced at Clara. Clara was looking at Mrs. Lawson with the perfectly composed expression she had perfected over 26 years of being looked at like she didn't belong. I appreciate the invitation, Ethan said. I'll think on it. Of course, Miriam said. She looked at Clara one more time, measuring, dismissing, filing away. Then she looked back at Ethan with the warmth restored. Don't let this place swallow you up, Ethan. A man needs more than a ranch. She got back in the buggy. Gerald followed, and before he did, he gave Clara one more look, slow and considering, and smiled the smile that said he thought he understood the whole situation and found it amusing. The buggy rolled away. Ethan stood in the yard and watched it go. I'm sorry, he said after a moment. For what? Clara asked. That. He nodded toward the road. I've been looked at like that my whole life, Clara said. I survived it. He turned to look at her. Something moved in his eyes, something she couldn't name, but felt the weight of. You shouldn't have to, he said. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She went inside and put the Lawsons' basket on the counter, and she stood there for a moment with her hands flat on the wood, and she breathed. She shouldn't have to. 4 words. Simple. Certain. Said like they were obvious. Nobody had ever said that to her before. Saturday came, and Ethan did not go to the Lawson gathering. He said nothing about it directly. He simply stayed on the ranch, worked the fence on the north side in the morning. Spent the afternoon with the roan mare, who had over the past 2 weeks progressed from refusing to look at him to allowing him to stand within arm's reach. At supper, he was quieter than usual, which Clara had learned to read not as mood, but as thought, the particular stillness of a man working something through. After supper, Rory went to bed early, and Clara was clearing the table when Ethan said without preamble, You looked at her. Clara paused. Mrs. Lawson. When she said alone, you looked at her without blinking. He had his coffee cup in both hands. He wasn't looking at her. Most people look away from Miriam Lawson when she uses that voice. I've had practice looking at people who use that voice, Clara said. She set the plates aside and sat down across from him. She wants Margaret established. She's decided you're the right situation. The basket was an opening move. I know what it was, he said. Do you want me to ask what your intentions are? Clara kept her tone level. Because I won't. He looked at her then. I'm not going to marry Margaret Lawson, he said. Flat and final. Clara held his gaze. That's not my business, Mr. Callahan. I'm telling you anyway, he said. Because Miriam Lawson is going to make certain assumptions, and those assumptions are going to come back to this ranch, and I want you to know where I stand. Clara was quiet for a moment. Where do you stand? She asked. He looked at his coffee cup. I stand, he said slowly, in a position of not trusting easily, and not making commitments I don't mean. He paused. Margaret Lawson is a fine woman. She deserves someone who will mean it. And you wouldn't? I don't know her, he said. Her mother's been arranging for us to know each other for 2 years, and I still don't know her. That tells me something. Clara thought about that. What does it tell you? She asked. That she's letting her mother arrange things, he said, instead of arranging them herself. He looked up. The woman I'd mean it with would arrange things herself. The kitchen was very quiet. Clara stood up and took the plates to the basin. That's a high standard, she said, her back to him. Probably, he said. She heard him push back from the table. She heard his boots on the floor as he crossed to the door. Good night, Miss Whitmore, he said. Good night, Mr. Callahan, she said. She listened to his footsteps on the porch until they faded. She stood at the basin for a long moment with her hands in the water. She was not thinking about Margaret Lawson. She was thinking about a woman who arranges things herself. She was thinking, I do that. I have always done that. I have arranged everything for everyone my entire life, and nobody ever noticed. She scrubbed the plates clean. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. The roan mare came to Ethan's hand on a Tuesday. Clara saw it happen from the fence. She'd come out to call him for the midday meal, and stopped when she saw him in the paddock standing easy hand out and the mare walking toward him. Not trembling, not rolling her eyes, just walking. Steady, deliberate, her head low in the posture of an animal that has decided finally to trust. The mare put her nose to his palm. Ethan went absolutely still. He let her smell him. He let her decide. And then slowly, he brought his other hand up and laid it against the side of her neck, and the mare stood there and accepted it. And something in Ethan's face opened up in a way Clara hadn't seen before. Something unguarded and private and quietly enormous. He didn't know she was watching. She turned around and went back to the house and set the table for lunch. When he came in, she said nothing about it. He sat down and poured his coffee, and then he said into the middle of the room, "She came to me." "I know," Clara said. She set the bread on the table. "I saw." He looked at her. His face was still slightly open in that unguarded way. "She just decided," he said. "Just like that. 3 weeks, and then she just decided." "Things take the time they take," Clara said. She sat down across from him. "You can't rush something that was hurt into trusting again. You can only be consistent enough that it becomes worth the risk." He looked at her. The way he looked at her was different from how he had looked at her in the first weeks. It was still direct, still steady, but it had depth to it now. Like he was seeing something he hadn't seen before, or seeing something he'd seen but hadn't yet named. "Is that how it works?" he said. "That's how it worked for me," Clara said, before she could think about whether she wanted to say it. He was very still. "In Willow Creek?" he asked. She picked up her coffee cup. She held it with both hands. "I learned to be very careful about trust," she said. "When you grow up being told that your judgment is wrong, and your feelings are inconvenient, and your presence is a problem, you either stop trusting your own instincts entirely, or you—" She paused. "You become very particular about what you trust and why." He didn't say anything. He wasn't filling the silence with comfort, which she appreciated. He was just listening. "The ranch," she said after a moment. "It's been good for me. The work. Having things that need doing and doing them. Knowing the accounts are right." She looked at the table. "Feeling like what I do here matters." "It does," he said. She looked at him. "I know," she said. "That's what's different." He held her gaze. And then Rory came banging through the back door, talking about a section of fence that had come down in the night, and the moment broke, and Ethan turned to deal with Rory, and Clara got up to get more coffee. But the conversation stayed with her all day, like a handprint on warm glass, present warm, slowly fading, but not gone. The letter arrived on a Friday in the same mailbag as the ranch supply invoices. Rory brought it in with the rest of the post and set it on the kitchen table without comment. But Clara saw him glance at the return address before he put it down, and she saw the glance, quick and careful, that he shot toward the barn where Ethan was working. She looked at the envelope. The return address was Boston, Massachusetts. The handwriting was precise and feminine. She left it on the table. When Ethan came in for the noon meal, he saw it immediately. He picked it up. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of a man looking at something he has been both expecting and dreading. Then he put it in his shirt pocket and sat down. He didn't open it at the table. He didn't open it at supper. After supper, when Rory had gone to bed and Clara was putting the kitchen to rights, she heard him in the sitting room, and there was a long silence, and then the particular sound of paper being unfolded. She worked quietly in the kitchen and did not intrude. She was drying the last of the dishes when he appeared in the doorway. He looked not broken. She wanted to be precise about that. He looked like a man who had opened a wound he thought had closed and found it still raw. "From someone I used to know," he said. She set down the dish towel. She looked at him. She waited. He came to the table and sat down. He didn't have the letter with him. He'd left it in the other room, which she thought meant something. "She's coming through the territory," he said. "Her husband has business in Helena. She wrote to say—" He stopped. "She wanted me to know." Clara sat down. "Her husband," she said. She married. 3 years ago. He looked at his hands. I knew that. Someone told me. And she's writing to tell you she'll be nearby, Clara said. She says she hopes I'm well. He said it flatly without color. She says she hopes the ranch has recovered. Clara thought about the accounting gaps, the 2 missing years, the entries that just stopped. She's the one who left, Clara said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And she married someone else. Yes. And now she's writing to tell you she hopes you're well. He looked up at her. You think that's unkind, he said. Clara considered. I think it's thoughtless, she said. Whether she means it that way or not. She paused. What are you going to do? He was quiet. Nothing, he said. Nothing, Clara repeated. I'm not going to answer it. I'm not going to arrange a meeting. I'm not going to... He stopped. He looked at his hands again. She made her choice. She made it a long time ago. A letter doesn't unmake that. Clara looked at him, the set of his jaw, the way he was holding himself with that careful steadiness that she recognized as the thing he used to stay upright when something pulled at the ground beneath him. Good, she said. He looked at her. Good, he said. Good, she said. It would have been a very bad idea. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite the ghost of a smile this time, something closer to the real thing. Why? He asked. Because you're not the same man she left, Clara said. And whatever she remembers, that's who she'd be looking for. And that man's been gone for 4 years. She met his eyes. Let him stay gone. He looked at her for a long time. You're plain spoken, he said. I've been told, she said. I don't mean it as a criticism, he said. I mean nobody talks to me plain. They walk around what they're trying to say and expect me to meet them halfway. He paused. You just say it. Indirection wastes time, Clara said. I've never had the luxury of it. He nodded slowly. He stood up. He stood there for a moment looking at her in that new deep way. Miss Whitmore, he said. Mr. Callahan, she said. The Harlan County Cattlemen's Social is in 2 weeks, he said. It's the kind of thing I usually don't attend. He paused. I'm considering going this year. Clara looked at him carefully. Is that so? She said. The ranchers bring their families. Some bring their housekeepers, or their sisters, or... He seemed to be picking his way through the sentence with unusual care. It's a social event, for the whole household. The kitchen was very quiet. I see, Clara said. I'm not asking, he said. I'm informing you of the situation. He picked up his hat from the hook by the door. In case you had thoughts about it. I don't have a dress suitable for a social event, Clara said. Rory goes to town Thursday, he said. The supply account covers household needs. Clara looked at him. A dress for the social would be a household need, she said. If a member of the household is attending a social, he said, then yes, I would say it is. He put on his hat. I went to bed. Clara sat at the kitchen table in the quiet for a long time after that, with the summer night coming in through the window and the sound of the cattle distant and the stars beginning to appear beyond the glass. A member of the household. She turned the phrase over in her mind. She examined it. She looked at it from every angle the way she looked at a column of figures carefully without assumption, wanting to be sure of what she was actually seeing and not what she wanted to see. She could not quite make it mean nothing. She could not quite allow it to mean too much. She sat in the middle of those two things and breathed. The dress came on Thursday, brought back by Rory, along with the flour and the salt and the new hinge for the cellar door. He set the paper-wrapped package on the kitchen table with the careful reverence of a boy who had been given extremely specific instructions and was very aware of the consequences of getting them wrong. Mr. Callahan told Mrs. Delmar at the dress shop, Rory said. Said practical but good quality. Said blue if she had it. Clara looked at the package. He specified blue, she said. Yes, ma'am. Rory was watching her with bright, interested eyes. Mrs. Delmar said she had one that would do fine. She also said to tell Mr. Callahan she expects an introduction at the social. Clara opened the package. The dress was blue, a deep settled blue, the kind of color that said permanent rather than decorative. It was simply cut, no excess, no frippery, but it was made of good material, the kind that held its shape, and it had been sized somehow approximately correctly. "How did he know the size?" Clara asked. Rory coughed. "He described you to Mrs. Delmar." Clara looked at the boy. Rory looked at the ceiling. "He described me," Clara said, and I'm quoting, "ma'am. She's not tall, she's not wide, she works hard, and she doesn't fuss. Get something practical." Rory paused. Mrs. Delmar said that was the most useful description she'd had all year. Clara looked at the dress. She put her hand on the fabric. Nobody had bought her a dress before. Not for any reason, not in any circumstances she could call to memory. "Thank you, Rory," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and went to put the rest of the supplies away with the kind of studied innocence that meant he was working very hard not to grin. The Harlan County Social was held at the Granger Barn, which was the largest structure in the county and had hosted every gathering of significance for the past 20 years. By the time Ethan's wagon rolled into the yard, it was already crowded, ranchers and their families, merchants and their wives, a fiddle band setting up in the corner, children running under the lantern light. Clara sat beside Ethan on the wagon seat in her new blue dress and kept her hands in her lap and said nothing. He helped her down from the wagon. He did it without thinking about it, just put out his hand and she took it, and he steadied her as she stepped down, and then he kept hold of her hand for a moment longer than the practical situation required. Neither of them commented on it. They went in together. Clara had been to Willow Creek socials before the few times her family had taken her, which were few because she didn't perform well at them, she was told. She stood too still. She didn't laugh at the right times, she was too serious. She stood still now beside Ethan and watched the room. She saw the Lawsons almost immediately. Miriam in a dress that cost more than Clara's monthly wage standing with a circle of women near the refreshment table. And Margaret, she had to be Margaret beside her. A handsome woman, pleasantly pretty with a careful smile, and the particular look of someone who had been told all her life that her job was to be appealing. Margaret saw Ethan at almost the same moment, and then she saw Clara beside him. Clara watched the adjustment happen in Margaret's face, the pleasant smile staying in place, but the eyes changing, recalculating. It was a very controlled adjustment. Whatever else Margaret Lawson was, she was trained. Ethan touched the brim of his hat to the room in general and began making his way through it, and Clara went with him, and she watched how the room watched Ethan, the ranchers who respected him, the wives who were curious, the men who wanted his attention on cattle business, and she watched how they watched her, mostly with questions in their eyes. The evening was well along when a woman Clara didn't know stepped up beside her, 50 or so, broad-built, with an expression like weather that has decided to be pleasant today. "You're with Callahan," the woman said. "I keep his house," Clara said. The woman looked at her sideways. "He's not talked to anyone in 2 years at these things. Just stands near the wall and leaves early." She looked across the room to where Ethan was in conversation with 2 older ranchers. "He's been over there 40 minutes. That's a record." Clara followed her gaze. Ethan was listening to one of the ranchers, but as she watched, he turned slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough, and found her across the room. He found her immediately, like he'd known exactly where she was. He turned back to the conversation. The woman beside Clara made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Interesting," she said. "Mrs.," Clara said. "Granger," the woman said. "This is my barn." She looked at Clara directly. "You're not what Miriam Lawson expected." "Mrs. Lawson expected something specific," Clara asked. "Mrs. Lawson expected nobody," Granger said. "She expected him to come alone and leave early and allow Margaret to have another year of maybe." She sipped her cup. "You've disrupted her arithmetic." Clara said nothing. Are you good for him?" Granger asked, bluntly without softening it. Clara looked at her. "I keep his house," she said. "I've organized his accounts. His kitchen garden is producing. His pantry is stocked." She paused. "And his mare came to his hand last week for the first time since she arrived." Granger looked at her for a long moment. That horse hasn't let anyone near her in 2 years, she said. She needed consistency, Clara said. Not pressure. Granger was quiet. She said, and she walked away. It was near the end of the evening when Miriam Lawson found her. Clara was standing near the barn door with a cup of punch, watching the fiddle band, when she heard the sound of deliberate footsteps and felt the change in the air that she had long ago learned to associate with incoming judgment. "Miss Whitmore," Miriam said. "Mrs. Lawson," Clara said. She didn't move. Miriam arranged herself beside her with the easy confidence of a woman who has been managing social situations for 40 years. "I wanted to introduce myself properly," Miriam said. "We didn't have much chance at the ranch." "No," Clara agreed. "You've settled in well," Miriam said, pleasantly. "The ranch must be much improved. Ethan was always hopeless at domestic management." A pause. "He needs someone capable." "He is someone capable," Clara said. "He just needed the books organized." Miriam's smile didn't waver. "Of course, and you've been very helpful with that, I'm sure." She turned to face Clara more directly. "You're from Willow Creek." "Yes." "I know the Whitmores slightly. Franklin Whitmore." "My father," Clara said. "Yes." Miriam's eyes moved over her, that measuring look barely disguised. "And your father arranged this position for you." "He knew of the position," Clara said. "I took it, of course." Miriam turned back to watch the room. "You know Margaret has a great deal of genuine affection for Ethan. They've known each other for years. There's real history there." She paused on the word real. "That kind of foundation is important." "I'm sure it is," Clara said. "He's a man who needs roots," Miriam said. "Community, family, not—" She let the pause do its work. "A temporary arrangement." Clara looked at her. She looked at her the way she had looked at her at the ranch, steady, unblinking, with the perfect composure she had built over 26 years. "Mrs. Lawson," she said, "I keep Mr. Callahan's house and his accounts. What he does beyond that is his own concern." She paused. "And his own choice." Miriam's smile stayed, but something behind it shifted. "Of course," she said. Across the room. Ethan had finished his conversation. He was moving through the crowd, and Clara tracked him without meaning to, and he was moving toward her with the direct, unhurried purpose of a man who has decided where he's going. He reached her. He stood beside her. He glanced at Miriam. "Mrs. Lawson," he said. He touched his hat. "Ethan," she said, warmly. "We were just getting acquainted." "Good," he said. He didn't ask what they'd been talking about. He looked at Clara. "Ready to head back?" "Yes," she said. "Good night, Mrs. Lawson," he said. He offered Clara his arm. She took it. They walked out of the barn together into the cool summer night, and she felt she couldn't help it. She was only human. Miriam Lawson's eyes on her back the whole way. Neither of them spoke until the wagon was rolling. Then Ethan said, without looking at her, "She say anything worth hearing?" "Nothing I didn't already know," Clara said. He made a sound that was possibly the beginning of a laugh. She looked at him in the dark. "What?" she said. "Thing," he said. He was looking at the road. "Just you're something, Miss Whitmore." The night was warm and wide and full of stars, and the road ran ahead of them like a sentence not yet finished, and Clara looked up at the sky above Montana and thought, something. She had been called nothing for so long that something landed in her like a struck match. She held it carefully. She didn't want to put it out. The wagon rolled on through the summer night, and neither of them needed to say anything else, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't demand filling, that trusts itself to hold them both, that sits between two people. Like the beginning of an agreement neither has put into words yet. She would put no words to it tonight. But she held it. She held it the whole long way home. The morning after the social. Clara found the ledger on the kitchen table, with a note tucked inside the front cover. Ethan's handwriting. 3 words. Fix it all. She stood in the kitchen with the note in her hand, and the early light coming through the window, and she felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she'd been holding so long she'd stopped noticing it. He trusted her with the whole of it. Not just the pieces she'd shown him she could handle. Everything. She made the coffee. She sat down with the ledger. She got to work. The ranch settled into a different rhythm after the social harder to name, easier to feel. Ethan still left before 5 and came in with the light failing. He still spoke in the economical way of a man for whom words were tools, not decoration. But something had shifted in the architecture of the house, the way a door shifts when the frame settles. Still the same door, still the same frame, but it swings easier, now closes cleaner. He started leaving the sitting room door open in the evenings. Small thing. But the sitting room had been closed every evening since she'd arrived, and she had understood without being told that it was his space the way the kitchen was hers. Now the door stood open, and she could hear him in there, the scratch of a pen, the occasional turn of a page, and she suspected he could hear her in the kitchen, the soft sounds of the last of the clearing up, the closing of the pantry, the banking of the stove. They didn't speak across the distance, but the open door said something. She let it say it. Rory noticed. Rory noticed everything and said nothing with his mouth and everything with his face, and by the end of the 4th week, he had developed a habit of finishing his supper very quickly and finding reasons to be in the barn, which Clara thought was probably the most tactful thing a 15-year-old boy had ever managed. The roan mare. Ethan had named her June, which Clara found appropriate, and didn't say so, was now accepting a halter. He was working her in the paddock every morning before the day's work, and Clara sometimes watched from the fence, not announcing herself, just watching the particular patience he brought to that work. The way he read the animal. The way he adjusted without making an event of it. How was good at it. Genuinely good. The kind of good that comes from caring about the thing, not just the result. She was thinking about that standing at the fence on a Thursday morning in the 6th week watching him work. June threw a simple circle on the lead when she heard the wagon. She heard it before she saw it, which was how she'd learned to process things at Redstone. The sounds came first, and you had a moment to prepare yourself before the source arrived. This wagon was moving fast. Faster than a supply run, faster than a social call. The speed of something urgent or something angry. She turned. The wagon came around the bend and into the yard, and she saw her father on the seat. And beside him Delia. And behind them in the wagon bed, a man she didn't recognize. Mid-40s, well-dressed in the way of someone who wanted to look like more than he was, with the particular self-satisfied set of a man who believed himself to be arriving to solve a problem. Clara's hands went still on the fence rail. Ethan had stopped working June. He was looking at the wagon. He looked at Clara. She kept her face composed. She had 26 years of practice. "That your family?" he said quietly. "Yes," she said. He handed June's lead to her without asking if she wanted it, which meant he was planning to walk to the wagon, which meant he was planning to stand between her and whatever was coming. She took the lead. She stood her ground at the fence. Her father climbed down from the wagon with the careful dignity of a man who needed an audience to feel significant. He looked at Ethan, first assessed him the way he assessed everything for usefulness and status, and then he looked at Clara. "There you are," Franklin Whitmore said, as though she'd been hiding. "Here I am," Clara said. "Papa." Delia climbed down after him in a yellow dress that was too fine for a wagon ride. She was looking around the ranch with bright, evaluating eyes, not unkind exactly, just acquisitive. Counting. The man in the wagon bed climbed down last, and he straightened his coat and looked at Clara with the expression of a man examining a purchase he wasn't sure was worth the price. "Clara," her father said, coming closer. "I want you to meet someone. This is Howard Pruitt. He's a feed merchant out of Miles City. He's expressed an interest in," a pause, "making a formal arrangement." Clara looked at Howard Pruitt. Howard Pruitt looked back at her with the careful consideration of a man at an auction. She looked at her father. "No," she said. Her father's face stiffened. "You haven't heard the terms." "I don't need to hear the terms," Clara said. Her voice was entirely level. "I have a position here. I have wages. I have work that matters. I'm not available for a formal arrangement with a man I've never met." "You don't have a choice," her father said. The careful dignity was fraying at the edges now. "You're 26 years old. Pruitt is a reasonable man with a good business. He's willing to overlook— Overlook what? Clara said. Her father stopped. Overlook what, Papa? She said again. Quiet, precise. Ethan had not moved. He was standing 10 feet to her left, and he had not moved or spoken, but she could feel his attention on her like a hand at her back, not pushing, not pulling, just there. Your situation, her father said finally. A woman living alone with a man she's not married to. It doesn't look— I live in his house and I keep it, Clara said. The way a housekeeper does. That is what a housekeeper is. People talk, Delia said pleasantly. She was looking at the house with those bright counting eyes. They've been talking since you left. Let them, Clara said. Her father's face went through several things in quick succession: frustration, calculation, and then something that Clara recognized as the thing he used when he decided to change tactics. He turned to Ethan. Mr. Callahan, he said, with the elaborate respect men like Franklin Whitmore used on men they needed something from. I appreciate that my daughter has been useful to you. But I think you can understand that a father has a responsibility to see his daughter properly settled. We've made a good arrangement here for her. I didn't make it, Clara said. Clara. Mr. Pruitt, Ethan said. Everyone looked at him. It was the first time he'd spoken. His voice was even. His face was unreadable. Did you come to this ranch today, expecting to leave with Miss Whitmore? He asked. Pruitt blinked. He looked at Franklin. He looked back at Ethan. Well, he said. Her father indicated that the situation might be— Miss Whitmore, Ethan said, still looking at Pruitt, is employed on this ranch. She has a contract. He paused. You were not consulted when that contract was made, Mr. Whitmore, and you're not required to be consulted about how it ends. Franklin Whitmore's face went red. She's my daughter, he said. She's an adult woman, Ethan said. He said it without heat, without drama. The way you state a fact that shouldn't require stating. With her own wages and her own work and her own right to make her own decisions. He looked at Franklin directly. I think you know that. The yard was very quiet. Howard Pruitt was looking between the two men with the expression of a man who had come expecting a transaction and had walked into something considerably more complicated. Delia was no longer looking at the house. She was looking at Ethan. And then she was looking at Clara. And something crossed Delia's face, not malice exactly, but the impulse toward it, the reaching for the sharpest tool available. She told you, Delia said with a little smile. She looked at Ethan. About why nobody in Willow Creek would take her. About what they say about her there. Delia, their father said sharply. He should know, Delia said pleasantly. He should know what kind of woman he's keeping on his ranch. She's not just plain Mr. Callahan. She's— Enough, Clara said. Her voice came out different than she expected. Not louder, actually quieter, but with a weight to it that stopped Delia mid-sentence in a way that shouting never had. Delia stared at her. Clara handed June's lead back to Ethan without looking at him. She walked toward her family. She stopped 6 feet from her father. I want to be very clear, she said. I am not going to Miles City. I am not going to marry Howard Pruitt. I am not going home. She looked at her father steadily. You sent me here because you thought nobody would want me. That is what you believed. That is what you told yourself to make it feel like something other than what it was. Her father opened his mouth. She kept going. You sent me here as a joke, she said. The town thought it was funny. The unwanted daughter sent to the lonely rancher because what better use for something nobody wants? Her voice didn't shake. She had lived inside this truth long enough that it had become simply a fact, and facts didn't require grief, they just required accuracy. But I'm not unwanted here. I'm not a joke here. I do real work that matters, and I'm paid fairly for it, and nobody in this house looks at me like I'm a problem to be solved. Howard Pruitt had gone very still. Her father was breathing through his nose. Delia had lost her pleasant smile. I'm asking you to leave, Clara said. All three of you. And I'm asking you not to come back unless you're prepared to treat me the way a person deserves to be treated. She paused. I don't think that's too much to ask. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Ethan stepped up beside her, not in front of her, not between her and her family, but beside her. Shoulder almost level with hers. And he said nothing. He just stood there. It was the most important thing he could have done. Franklin Whitmore looked at his daughter. He looked at the man standing beside her. Something moved in his face, the machinery of a proud man encountering a wall he hadn't expected. "Clara," he said, and his voice had come down several degrees. "Think about what you're—" "I've thought," she said. "I've been thinking for 26 years. I'm done thinking about it." Her father looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and climbed back onto the wagon. Pruitt, after a beat of confusion, climbed in after him. Delia was the last to go. She looked at Clara. Then she looked at Ethan. Then she looked at Clara again. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "Maybe," Clara said. "But it'll be my mistake. That's new." Delia got in the wagon. The wagon turned around in the yard and went back down the track, and Clara stood and watched it go, and she kept her face composed and her shoulders level until the sound of wheels faded entirely. Then the composure cracked. Not dramatically, not with tears or sound. Just a crack. Her hands trembled. One breath came out of her wrong, too hard, too fast. Ethan was beside her. He didn't touch her. He didn't reach for her. But he turned so that he was facing her, which meant she could look at him if she needed an anchor, and she did. She looked at him, and his face was steady, and that steadiness was the thing she held on to while the trembling moved through her and passed. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. And then, "No, not entirely." "Okay," he said. They stood in the yard, and the summer moved around them, and he waited while she collected herself the way she always collected herself, methodically, piece by piece, not rushing any of it. "You didn't have to do that," she said when she had herself back. "Which part?" he said. "The contract," she said. "You said I had a contract. That isn't—" "You do now," he said. She looked at him. "I'll have Rory bring the papers from the county clerk Thursday," he said. "Proper wages, proper term, room and board specified." He paused. "I should have done it when you arrived. I'm sorry I didn't." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you sorry?" she said. "Because if you'd had papers from the start," he said, "your father couldn't have tried that." He said it plain, without drama. The way he said everything that mattered. "That's my fault," Clara breathed. "Mr. Callahan," she said. "Ethan," he said. She stopped. He had never said that before. He had never offered the first name, which in 1882, Montana meant something specific, something that changed the nature of a conversation. "Ethan," she said carefully, as though she was learning the shape of the word. "You stood up to your whole family," he said. "The least you can do is use my name." The trembling had stopped. She was entirely herself again, collected and present. But something was different in the way she was standing, something less braced. "Thank you," she said, "for standing there." "I didn't do anything," he said. "You stood there," she said. That was enough. He looked at her, and then he said quietly, "Nobody should have to do that alone." She didn't answer. She went inside and made coffee and set it on the stove, and she stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hands on the counter and let the solid familiarity of the room hold her. The weight of the cups, the smell of the coffee, the sound of June moving in the paddock outside. Her hands had stopped trembling. She poured 2 cups and brought them out. The trouble was not finished with the Whitmores, as it turned out. 3 days later, Rory came back from a supply run to town, with his shoulders up around his ears and his eyes doing the particular avoiding something thing they did when he had information he didn't want to deliver. Clara saw it the moment he came through the kitchen door. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing happened," Rory said. There's some talk in town." "What kind of talk?" He set the supplies on the counter. He aligned them very carefully by size. "Rory," she said. He turned around. "There's a man named Pruitt who's been telling people things," he said. "In the saloon and the general store both. About why you're here. About your family sending you." He looked at her. "He's making it sound like something it isn't." Clara was very still. "What is he saying?" Rory's face went red in patches. That your father sent you here because no decent man would have you. That Callahan took you because he was desperate. He stopped. He's saying it like it's funny. She absorbed that. Does Ethan know? No, she said. Not yet, Rory said. He's out at the south fence. I came straight in. Clara poured herself a cup of coffee. She stood at the counter. She thought. Howard Pruitt had driven 3 hours from Miles City to collect a woman who had turned him down in front of a rancher who had faced him down. Men like Howard Pruitt did not absorb that quietly. They took it somewhere they felt more powerful. Somewhere the audience was sympathetic. A saloon was sympathetic to a man who'd been publicly embarrassed. The story he'd be telling would not be the true story. What's he saying? Rory's color deepened. That Callahan settled for something nobody else wanted, because he can't do better, because that woman in Boston. He stopped. Because the woman who left him proves he's not worth a woman of quality, Clara finished. Yeah, Rory said miserably. She set down her cup. She went to the door. Where are you going? Rory said. To find Ethan, she said. She found him at the south fence, as Rory had said, replacing a section of rail that had gone soft with the summer wet. He saw her coming, and something in his face changed the sharpening that meant he'd read something in how she was walking. What is it? He said. She told him. All of it. Plainly, without softening or dramatizing. She watched him listen, and she watched his face stay still, but his eyes went somewhere cold and quiet. Pruitt, he said when she'd finished. Yes. He set down the fence rail. He stood up straight. He can say what he wants about me, Ethan said. I don't care what that man says about me. He's saying it about me too, Clara said. I know. His jaw had gone tight. That's the part I care about. She looked at him. What are you going to do? She asked. Go to town, he said. And say what? He looked at her for a moment. The truth, he said. She felt something cold move through her. Not fear of Pruitt, something more complex. The particular dread of having your name said in rooms you're not in, shaped into something you didn't choose going out into the world attached to you permanently. The truth might make it worse, she said. People in town don't know me. They'll take whatever version they were given first. Then I'll give them a better version. Ethan. She said his name and watched him focus on her. A man riding into town angry doesn't look like truth. He looks like a man with something to defend. It was quiet. What would you do? He said. She thought. I'd go to town, she said. But not angry. And not just you. Both of us. She met his eyes. If I'm the subject of the story, then let them see me. He looked at her for a long moment. You sure? He said. I've been looked at my whole life, she said. I'm tired of not looking back. They went to Harlan Creek on Friday. Not with urgency, not with performance. They went the way they did everything that mattered steadily, without announcement in the wagon with Rory on the board, and the morning still cool. The Harlan Creek General Store was owned by a man named Ballard, who had the kind of steady civic presence that meant everyone passed through his store at some point, and most conversations began or ended there. Clara had not been to town since arriving at Redstone, and she was aware acutely, the way she was always aware of it, of the adjustment that happened in a room when she entered it. The reading. She had always dropped her eyes when that happened. She didn't drop them now. She walked into Ballard's store beside Ethan, and she held her head level, and she looked at people directly when they looked at her, and some of them looked away first, which was new. Ballard himself was behind the counter, a solid man in his 50s, bearded with the watchful eyes of someone who saw most of what happened in his town. Callahan, he said. Miss Whitmore. The fact that he used her name, had her name told her that Rory's information had been accurate. The story had reached this room. Mr. Ballard, Ethan said. He handed over the supply list. We're here for the weekly order and to settle last month's account. Clara put the account payment on the counter, the exact amount counted out organized. Ethan had given her the cash, and she had counted it herself because the ledger was hers now and the numbers were right. Ballard looked at the payment. He looked at the ledger page she'd clipped to it, the account summary she'd prepared clear and organized, showing every transaction for the past 6 weeks. He looked at it for a moment. "This is good work," he said. "Thank you," Clara said. "I've been going through the ranch account since I arrived. I can provide a full summary at any time if it's useful." Ballard looked at her. "You did these yourself," he said. "I've kept accounts since I was 15, she said. "My family's books, and now the ranch." She met his eyes. "The ranch is in better financial shape than Mr. Callahan realized. I've documented it all." Ballard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Pruitt was in here Wednesday." "I know," Clara said. "He had things to say." "I expect he did," she said. She held Ballard's gaze. "Mr. Ballard," she said, "I came to this ranch because my father saw an opportunity and took it. That's true. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She paused. "I also came here and I worked. And the accounts are right, and the kitchen is running, and the roan mare is taking a halter. Those things are also true." She let the silence sit for a second. "I'd rather be known by what I've done than by what Howard Pruitt says about what my father did." Ballard looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Ethan. Ethan said nothing. He looked back at Ballard with the steady, unembellished look of a man who doesn't need to add to what was just said. "Fair enough," Ballard said. He turned to pull the supply order. She turned to look at the store. Pruitt was there. She hadn't seen him when she came in. He'd been behind a shelf, and now he'd come around the end of it, and he was standing 12 feet from her with his coat buttoned, and his expression doing something complicated, surprise and discomfort, and the reassertion of confidence all at once. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Pruitt," she said. Ethan had turned. He was standing slightly forward, not blocking her, never blocking her, but present. The particular kind of present that changes the weight of a room. Pruitt looked at Ethan. He made a calculation. He looked back at Clara. "I hope there are no hard feelings," he said. "Smooth practiced. I was only trying to help your father see you settled." "I know what you were trying to do," Clara said. "And I know what you said in this town after I declined." She took one step toward him. "Let me be clear, Mr. Pruitt. I'm not a problem to be settled. I'm not a leftover to be collected. And the story you've been telling about this ranch and the people in it is not true, and you know it's not true, and I'd appreciate it if it stopped." Pruitt's smooth expression had developed a crack. "Now see here," he started. "She's asked you once," Ethan said. Quiet. Final. Pruitt looked at him. Something moved through Pruitt's face the particular moment when a man is deciding whether his pride is worth the cost. He decided. "Of course," Pruitt said. He pulled at his coat. "No harm intended." He walked out of the store. The door swung shut behind him. The store was quiet. And then Ballard from behind the counter made a sound. Clara turned. Howe was pulling up the supply order with his shoulders shaking, and the sound was, it was a laugh. Low, private, but genuine. "Miss Whitmore," he said without looking up. "If you ever want work in town, you come see me." The ride back from Harlan Creek was different from the ride there. Something had burned off the particular tension of a thing anticipated and then faced, and the particular ease that follows when the facing goes better than the fearing. Rory was openly cheerful in the way of a boy who had witnessed something he would describe dramatically for years. Ethan was quiet, but the quality of his quiet was different, not containing, not managing. Resting. "You all right?" he said after several miles. "Yes," she said. And this time it was true, without qualification. He nodded. A mile went by. "You didn't look away from him," Ethan said. "No," she said. "Most people would have." "I know," she said. "I used to." She looked at the road. "I don't think I can anymore." He was quiet. "Good," he said. She looked at him. "You say that a lot," she said. "When I mean it," he said. She turned back to the road. She let the summer morning come in around her, the smell of grass, the sound of the horses. Rory humming something tuneless on the board beside her. She thought about her father's face in the yard, about Delia's smile and what was behind it, about Pruitt walking out of the store with his coat pulled straight and his pride rearranged into something he could carry. She thought about standing up in all of it and not being swallowed by any of it. She thought about what it felt like. It felt like something being returned to her, something she hadn't known was missing until she felt it coming back. It was 2 days after the trip to town that she found the deed. She was reorganizing the bottom drawer of the roll-top desk, the drawer with the receipt books which she'd been through once already, but wanted to go through again, now that she had the full 2-year accounts corrected, and at the very back, under a folded survey map, she found an envelope. Old. The paper was yellowed at the edges. The seal on it had been broken. She pulled it out. She looked at the front. It was addressed to Ethan Callahan. But the handwriting on the back was not a name she recognized. She did not open it. She set it on top of the desk. She finished with the receipt books. She organized the drawer. She closed it. She went to find Ethan. How was in the barn with June running a brush along the mare's neck, and the mare was standing quiet and easy under his hand, in the way that still stopped Clara slightly, the contrast of what that animal had been when she arrived and what she was now. "There's an envelope," Clara said. "In the desk. In the bottom drawer under the survey maps. I didn't open it." Ethan's hand slowed on June's neck. "Envelope," he said. "Old. The seal's been broken once already." She paused. "I didn't recognize the handwriting on the back." He set the brush on the rail. He didn't move for a moment. "What color is the seal?" he said. "Blue," she said. "What's left of it?" He was quiet. "I'll look at it later," he said. "All right," she said. She turned to go. "Clara." She turned back. He was looking at June's neck, not at her. His hand was resting flat on the mare's flank. "Whatever that is," he said. "It's something I thought was settled. I thought it was done." A pause. "It's probably nothing." "All right," she said again. "If it's not nothing," he said, and then he stopped. "It'll still be all right," she said. She said it simply as a statement of intent rather than a promise she could guarantee. "Whatever it is." He looked at her then. He looked at her with that look. The deep one, the one that had been developing for weeks. The one that saw something he hadn't put words to yet. "I know," he said. She went back to the house. She did not look in the envelope, but she did sit at the kitchen table with her coffee and her account book and her own steady hands, and she thought about the look on his face when she'd found the ledger in a mess and started straightening it. She thought about the way he'd said fix it all. She thought about the mare trembling in the corner on the first day, and the mare standing easy under his hand now. She thought about patience. She thought about things that took the time they took. 2 hours later, she heard him come in from the barn. She heard him go to the sitting room. She heard the silence that meant he'd seen the envelope on the desk. She kept her eyes on the accounts. After a while, she heard the particular sound of a seal being lifted. Paper unfolding. A long silence. Then his footsteps in the hall. He came to the kitchen doorway. His face was not the face of a man holding nothing. His face was controlled in the specific way it got controlled when something had gotten through. "It's about the east pasture," he said. She set down her pen. "The deed to the Coulter parcel," he said. "The land that borders my east fence. The land you said wouldn't go anywhere." He looked at the envelope in his hand. Someone filed a challenge to the original land survey, before Coulter sold it, before anyone bought it. He stopped. "If the challenge holds, the boundary of that parcel comes 20 yards into my east pasture." Clara was very still. "When was the challenge filed?" she said. 3 years ago, he said. "Before or after you stopped looking at your accounts?" she said. He looked at her. "After," he said. She breathed. "Who filed it?" she said. He turned the envelope over. He looked at the back at the name she hadn't recognized. "Man named Gerald Lawson," he said. The kitchen went very quiet. Gerald Lawson. Miriam Lawson's son. The man who had ridden out to the ranch with his mother and his easy smile. Clara stood up. She went to the desk and pulled out her account book and the survey map she'd seen in the bottom drawer, and she spread them on the kitchen table. "Show me," she said. He came to the table. He spread the envelope's contents beside her materials. They both bent over the papers. The challenge was technical, a dispute about the original survey markers on the eastern boundary of the Coulter parcel, claiming the 1879 survey had been improperly conducted. If it held 20 yards of Ethan's east pasture, would fall inside the redrawn boundary. 20 yards didn't sound like much until you understood that the eastern fence ran along the best section of creek access on the property. Without that creek access, the east pasture cattle operation was compromised. "He knows the land," Clara said. "He should," Ethan said. "His family had cattle here before they moved to town. He knows what that creek access is worth." "And he bought the Coulter parcel," Clara said. "Rory said a family that wasn't ranchers bought it." "His wife's name," Ethan said. He said it quietly, but with the particular tone of a man watching a shape he'd missed become visible. "He'd buy it in someone else's name. Less obvious." Clara looked at the challenge document. She looked at the date. She looked at the names on it. "This needs to be in front of a county land clerk," she said. "There's a land commissioner who comes through Harlan Creek," Ethan said. "Twice a year. Next visit is in 3 weeks." "Then we have 3 weeks," she said. He looked at her. "We," he said. She looked up. "The accounts are my work," she said steadily. "If there's a financial record that supports the original survey payments, made materials purchased, expenses filed at the time, it'll be in your books. I've been through those books. I know where to look." She held his gaze. "If you want my help." He looked at her across the spread papers. "You'd do that," he said. "I already am," she said. He was quiet. "Gerald Lawson," he said after a moment. "His mother came out here with her basket and her smiles." He looked at the papers. "And her son files a land challenge he's been sitting on for 3 years and waits." "He was waiting," Clara said, "to see if you'd find out." "And if I didn't?" "If you didn't," she said carefully, "then in 3 years he had documentation that went unchallenged. Legally, that becomes very hard to contest." Ethan was quiet for a long time. "But I found out," he said. "You found out," Clara said. "Because the accounts are organized now. Because someone went through the bottom drawer." She paused. "Because someone was looking." He looked at her. There was something in his face that she had not seen there before. Not gratitude exactly, which she'd seen in its small daily forms. Something larger. Something that had to do with the specific rare experience of having been found, genuinely found by someone who was looking and who looked at what they found and didn't flinch. He picked up the challenge document. He squared it against the other papers. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks, she said. She pulled the account books toward her. She opened to the 1879 entries. He sat down across from her. He picked up the pen she'd been using. And they got to work. They worked through the night, not planned. It simply happened, the way honest work sometimes happens. You sit down with a problem, and the problem is bigger than you accounted for, and you keep going, because stopping feels worse than the tiredness. The lamp on the desk burned down twice. Clara replaced it both times without comment. Ethan made coffee somewhere around midnight and set a cup at her elbow without asking if she wanted it, which was how she knew he'd stopped thinking of her as a guest. The 1879 account entries were meticulous. In a way, the later years weren't his father's hands, she realized after the first hour. Before the ranch passed to Ethan. His father had kept books the way her own hands wanted to keep books, systematic, dated, cross-referenced. Every fence repair noted with the date and the materials cost. Every hired man's wages logged against the work performed. Every boundary survey recorded with the surveyor's name, the date, and the fee paid. "Your father kept good books," she said. Ethan looked up from the survey map he'd been tracing with his finger. "He kept everything," he said. "Letters, receipts, the original deed paperwork going back to his father." He paused. "I haven't looked at most of it since he died." "When did he die?" 1877. He looked back at the map. 2 years before the survey Lawson is contesting. Clara looked at the entry she'd been reading. "Then your father didn't commission the 1879 survey," she said. "You did." "I was 29, he said. I had the boundary resurveyed when I took full ownership. Standard practice. He paused. I remember hiring the man. Garfield out of Billings, certified surveyor. Is Garfield still in Billings? She said. I don't know, he said. That was 7 years ago. She wrote the name down. They worked another 2 hours. It was past 2 in the morning when she found a payment receipt folded inside a survey record she'd almost put aside as irrelevant. The receipt was for a boundary survey conducted in September of 1879, signed by one Thomas Garfield, certified land surveyor, state of Montana, with a stamp from the Harlan County Land Office confirming receipt and record. She set it on the table between them. Ethan looked at it. He picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. That's the signature, he said. That's Garfield. And that, Clara said, pointing to the stamp at the bottom, is the county land office confirming they received the survey at the time. Which means in September of 1879, the boundary was legally established and officially recorded. She paused. Lawson filed his challenge in 1880. After this was already in the county record. If the land commissioner looks at the filing dates... Lawson filed knowing this existed, Ethan said. He filed, Clara said carefully, banking on you not knowing this existed, betting that you wouldn't look. She met his eyes across the lamp. He was nearly right. Ethan set the receipt down. He looked at it. Something moved through his face, anger, but underneath the anger, something colder. The particular cold of a man, understanding that he has been played by someone who was smiling at him while they did it. Miriam, he said. She came out here with her basket. To see how things stood, Clara said. How much you knew. Whether the account books were in order. Whether anyone would notice. He was quiet. And I invited them in, he said. I gave them coffee. You didn't know, she said. No. He stood up. He moved away from the table, walked to the window. I've been living out here thinking I was past the hard part. Thinking the worst was... He stopped. I let myself get comfortable. I stopped watching. You were running a ranch alone, Clara said. You can't watch everything. I should have watched my own land, he said. She let him have that for a moment. She didn't soften it or argue it away, because he wasn't wrong, and she understood that he needed to sit with the fact of it rather than be talked past it. You're watching it now, she said. He turned from the window. Because you found it, he said. Because the books are organized now, she said. Which means things can be found. She looked at this receipt on the table. That's not luck, Ethan. That's the work we've been doing for 6 weeks. He looked at her across the room. He looked at her with the particular look she'd been learning to read, the one that meant he was seeing her, specifically, precisely in the way that mattered. Come to bed, she said. Or go to bed. A pause. We've done enough for tonight. The commissioner doesn't arrive for 3 weeks. Something in his face moved toward the ghost smile. That's the first time you've told me what to do, he said. Someone has to, she said. You've been up since 4 yesterday morning. He looked at the lamp. He looked at the papers. He picked up the receipt and folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his coat. Good night, Clara, he said. Good night, she said. She listened to his footsteps on the stairs. She banked the lamp. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the summer night and thought about the receipt and the survey and the stamp from the county office and the way Ethan had looked when she'd found it. She thought about the word we, the work we've been doing. She thought about how naturally it had come out of her mouth. She went to sleep. The days that followed had a shape that the earlier weeks hadn't quite found, a particular dailiness that was less about establishing patterns and more about inhabiting them. They had, without planning it, arrived at a life together on this ranch that functioned with the easy efficiency of something that had been designed well, rather than improvised. She made the coffee. He drank it before the sun was fully up. She kept the books. He ran the land. Rory moved between them like a satellite, cheerful and useful, and increasingly incapable of hiding the fact that he found the whole situation enormously satisfying. But there were new textures to the days now. Ethan started eating supper without his hat on, which he hadn't done in the first weeks. A small thing, but the kind of small thing that meant he'd stopped being a guest in his own kitchen. He started telling her things at the table, not monologuing, not performing just pieces. A section of fence that had given him trouble, a decision about the fall cattle drive, an observation about June's movement in the paddock. He told her things like she was a person whose opinion on them was expected and worth having. She told him things back. It was that simple and that enormous. On a Wednesday evening, in the 7th week, she told him about her mother's account book, the small leather ledger she'd kept as a girl tracking the household budget because no one else would. She didn't dress it up. She told it plain her father's pride, her mother's silence, the way she'd taught herself to make numbers tell the truth, because the truth was the only thing in that house she had any control over. He listened without interrupting. When she'd finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You've been taking care of things since you were 15, he said. "Since earlier than that," she said. 15 was when the ledger started. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "My mother used to say," he said slowly, "that the people who do the invisible work, the accounting, the organizing, the planning that nobody sees, are the ones who keep everything standing. She said you only notice them when they stop." He paused. She was right. But she didn't mean it as a compliment to the people doing the invisible work. She meant it as a warning. Clara looked at him. "A warning about what?" she said. "About how easy it is to let someone carry things without ever asking if they want to," he said. He set down his cup. He looked at her directly. "I've let you carry things here, since the 1st week, and I haven't—" He stopped. "I haven't asked." "I chose to," she said. "I know," he said. "But there's a difference between choosing and being given the choice." He paused. "You've been doing what needed doing. I want to know what you want, what you'd choose if someone actually asked." The kitchen was very quiet. Clara looked at her hands on the table. Nobody had ever asked her that before. Not her father, not her mother, not a single person in Willow Creek. "What do you want?" As though her wanting were a real thing. As though her answer would count for something. "I want to stay," she said. She said it quietly, but she meant it with her whole body. "Here," he said. "Here," she said. "This ranch, this work." She looked up. "This is the first place I've been where what I do every day matters. Where the numbers add up because I made them add up. Where something is better because I was here." She held his gaze. "I'd like to not have to leave that." He was very still. "You don't have to leave," he said. "I know the contract Rory filed covers 6 months," she said. "That was your term." "Terms can change," he said. He said it simply. "If both parties agree." She looked at him. "What would the new term say?" she said. He held her gaze. "Permanent," he said. One word. He said it in his usual way, direct, unembellished, meaning exactly what it said, and nothing less. Clara breathed. "Permanent is a long time," she said. "I know what permanent means," he said. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. She looked back up at him. "Ask me properly," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Will you stay?" "Yes," she said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Rory came in from the barn with hay in his hair and the energy of someone who had been outdoors for an hour and needed supper immediately. And Ethan turned to the boy and said something about the fence that needed checking, and Clara stood up to start the meal, and the ordinary motion of the evening folded around the extraordinary thing that had just happened, and held it there warm and intact. The letter from Thomas Garfield arrived 10 days before the land commissioner's visit. Ethan had written to Billings 2 weeks earlier, a short factual letter asking if the surveyor was still practicing and would be willing to appear before the Harlan County Land Commissioner to confirm the 1879 boundary survey. Clara had not known he'd written it until Rory brought the reply in from the mail. Garfield was alive. Garfield was still in Billings. Garfield remembered the Redstone survey because he'd been through the area 3 times that year, and Callahan's land had been the most straightforward job of the lot, and he had his own records, and he would be glad to come. He would arrive the day before the commissioner. Ethan read the letter at the kitchen table. He set it down. He looked at Clara. "He's coming," he said. "Good," she said. You thought he might not, he said. I thought he might be dead, she said honestly. 7 years is a long time. He folded the letter. Gerald Lawson is going to know we have the receipt. And now Garfield. Yes, she said. He'll do something, Ethan said. Men like that always do something when they see the ground shifting. Clara had been thinking about this since the night they'd found the document. She'd been thinking about what a man like Gerald Lawson would do when he understood that his 3-year plan was being dismantled by a woman who'd been sent to the ranch as a joke. He'll try to discredit the records, she said. Or me. Ethan looked at her. Or both, she said. Let him try, Ethan said. I want to be prepared for it, she said. Not surprised by it. Surprised is when you make mistakes. He nodded. He looked at the letter. He looked at her. What do you need? He said. I need copies of every relevant document, she said. The original deed, the 1879 survey receipt, the land office stamp record, your father's account entries from before the survey. She paused. And I want to write to the county clerk in Harlan Creek and request the official record of when Lawson's challenge was filed and whether it was filed correctly. Why whether it was filed correctly? He said. Because men who are sure of themselves get careless with procedure, she said. And if his challenge has a procedural flaw, wrong form, wrong office, wrong timeline, it may not be valid regardless of what the commissioner decides about the survey. He stared at her. You know land filing procedure, he said. I know accounting procedure, she said. The principles are the same. Every system has rules. The rules have to be followed in order. If they're not, the entry is invalid. She met his eyes. I learned that at 15 with a ledger. I imagine it applies to land filings too. Ethan set down the letter. Write the letter to the clerk, he said. She was already reaching for the paper. Miriam Lawson came to the ranch 4 days before the commissioner's visit. She came alone this time, no Gerald, no basket, no advance notice. Just her buggy in the yard on a Thursday afternoon, and herself at the front door, when Clara answered it in the same fine dress and the same practiced smile, but the smile was doing more work than usual. Mrs. Lawson, Clara said. Miss Whitmore. She looked past Clara into the house. Is Ethan available? He's in the field, Clara said. I can send Rory for him. Please, Miriam said. I'll wait. Clara let her in and put water on for tea and went to the back door to send Rory. While she waited for Ethan, she sat across from Miriam Lawson in the sitting room with her hands in her lap and her face composed. And Miriam Lawson did what Clara had long observed powerful women do when they found themselves in uncertain territory. She talked. She talked about Margaret, who was well, and asked after Ethan. She talked about the county social coming up in the fall. She talked about Gerald's business interests, casually woven into other subjects. Watching Clara as she spoke the way a woman watches something for a reaction she expects to provoke. Clara gave her nothing. She answered the questions she was directly asked and did not answer the ones that were implied, and she kept her teacup steady in her hands, and she waited. Ethan came in from the field with dust on him and his hat in his hand, and he came to the sitting room door and looked at Miriam, and then at Clara. And Clara gave him the briefest of looks that said she came alone. She hasn't said why watch her. He sat down. Miriam, he said. This is unexpected. I was passing through, she said, which was not true, since no one passed through Redstone Ranch on the way to anywhere. I wanted to check in. I heard there's been some business with the county commissioner coming. Word travels, Ethan said. It does, she agreed. She set down her teacup. She dropped the practiced pleasantness by about a degree, not all the way, but enough that what was underneath it became visible. Ethan, I want to be honest with you. Gerald has made some investments in this area that he was hoping would develop in a particular way. And I understand there may be some questions about the eastern parcel boundary that could affect those plans. There are questions, Ethan said. Yes, I think, Miriam said carefully, that there may be a way to handle this that works for everyone, without the county commissioner having to get involved, without everything becoming formal. Ethan was quiet. What way would that be? He said. Gerald would be willing to discuss the boundary, she said. Come to an understanding, something neighborly. She paused. Rather than whatever Miss Whitmore has been preparing. The room went very still. Clara looked at her. Miriam looked back. The pleasant smile was almost entirely gone now. Whatever I've been preparing, Clara said. Gerald says you've been writing to the county clerk, Miriam said. And to Billings. Something cold moved through the room. The county clerk had told Gerald Lawson about her inquiry. Or his brother had. Someone in that office was passing information. Clara filed that fact and kept her face still. I've been organizing Mr. Callahan's records, Clara said. That's my job. Of course, Miriam said. She looked at Ethan. Ethan, I'm asking you as someone who knew your family come to an arrangement with Gerald. The boundary in question is 20 yards. It's not worth a legal proceeding. It's not worth the cost and the attention. The cost and the attention, Ethan said slowly, are worth the creek access. Gerald might be willing to negotiate access rights, Miriam said. In writing, formal easement, it might actually be more useful to you than the current arrangement. He looked at her for a long moment. He files a challenge to a legally established survey, he said. He sits on it for 3 years. He buys the land through his wife's name, and now he wants to negotiate. He paused. That's a generous offer from a man who's already lost. Miriam's face went flat. He hasn't lost, she said. The commissioner hasn't ruled. No, Ethan said. But Thomas Garfield arrives tomorrow. Miriam blinked. For the first time since she'd walked into the sitting room, she looked not quite afraid, but something close to it. The calculation behind her eyes was working very fast. Garfield, she said. The surveyor who did the 1879 boundary, Clara said. Her voice was even. He has his own records, and the county land office has the original filing receipt with their stamp. She paused. Mr. Lawson's challenge was filed after the official county record was established, which may mean it was filed outside the permissible contest window. She looked at Miriam steadily. That's a procedural question, not a survey question. It's separate from whatever Garfield says. Miriam looked at her. She looked at her with the full, unguarded look of a woman who had fundamentally underestimated something. You found the window, she said almost to herself. I found the filing date, Clara said, and the procedural requirements for a valid challenge. Yes. The room was very quiet. Ethan stood up. Mrs. Lawson, he said, I appreciate you coming. I want you to give Gerald a message from me. He was entirely calm, entirely clear. The commissioner will hear the evidence and rule on it. If the ruling goes in my favor, and I believe it will, I won't seek further action provided the matter is dropped completely and the challenge is formally withdrawn. That's the only arrangement I'm willing to make. He paused. It's a generous offer considering. Miriam sat very still. Then she rose. She arranged herself. She reassembled the practiced smile, though it sat differently now. I'll tell him, she said. She looked at Clara once more, a long, complicated look, and in it, beneath the hostility, Clara saw something she recognized. The particular expression of a woman who has spent her life arranging things for people who didn't ask to be arranged, and who has just realized the arrangement has slipped. You're not what I expected, Miriam said. No, Clara said. I know. Miriam walked out. The door closed. Ethan let out a long breath. He turned to Clara. He looked at her across the sitting room with the open, unguarded look that had been appearing more and more in his face and that she was learning to meet rather than deflect. The procedural window, he said. You knew about that. I found it in the territory land statutes, she said. Rory got the volume from the courthouse library 2 weeks ago. I've been reading it in the evenings. He stared at her. You've been reading the Montana land statutes, he said. It seemed relevant, she said. He put his hand over his face, not in distress, in the particular gesture of a man trying not to do something with his expression that his dignity wasn't ready for yet. Clara, he said. Yes. He looked at her. Nothing, he said. Just... He shook his head. He sat back down. Nothing. But the something he hadn't said filled the room like summer heat. Thomas Garfield arrived the next afternoon as promised, a compact, gray-haired man with the kind of weathered precision that came from a life spent measuring land, who brought his own surveying records in a canvas bag and set them on the kitchen table with the matter-of-fact confidence of a man who kept meticulous files and was extremely comfortable with the concept of being right. He shook Ethan's hand. He shook Clara's hand. He accepted the coffee she put in front of him. He looked at the documents spread on the table and nodded in the slow way of a man confirming something he already knew. "That's my stamp," he said, pointing to the receipt. "That's my signature. That's my survey." He pulled his own copy from the canvas bag and laid it beside hers. "Identical." He looked at Clara. "You organized all this," he said. "I work the ranch accounts," she said. He looked at Ethan. "Where'd you find her?" he said. Ethan's mouth did the almost smile thing. "She found me," he said. Garfield looked between them. He made the sound that Mrs. Granger had made at the social, that low private sound that meant he'd understood something that wasn't being said. "Well," he said, "the commissioner's going to have a straightforward morning then." He picked up his coffee. "Your boundary's clean, Callahan. Always was. The only question is whether the man who challenged it knew that when he filed." "He knew," Ethan said. Garfield nodded. He looked at his papers. "That's not a survey question," he said. "That's a character question." "Yes," Ethan said. "It is." The commissioner arrived the following morning at 8, and by 10, the matter was effectively concluded. Clara had laid the documents out in precise order: survey receipt, land office, stamp, filing dates for the challenge, the relevant statute regarding the permissible contest window, and Garfield's personal records, all organized into a clear sequence that told its story without requiring interpretation. She had written a one-page summary at the front of the file, numbered, dated, cross-referenced. She was not present for the commissioner's proceedings, which were held at the county courthouse in Harlan Creek. Ethan went and Garfield went, and Rory drove them. She stayed at the ranch. She worked in the kitchen garden because the beans needed tying, and she needed something to do with her hands. She checked the water in June's trough. She went over the autumn supply projections she'd been building because in 3 weeks the fall purchases needed to be made, and she wanted the numbers right. She tried not to think about what was happening in Harlan Creek. She managed mostly. Ethan was back before 3 in the afternoon. She heard the wagon and came to the yard. He climbed down, and he looked at her across the yard, and his face was the open, unguarded face. "The challenge was dismissed," he said. "Procedural invalidity. Lawson filed outside the permissible window." He paused. "The commissioner also made a formal note in the county record that the 1879 survey is confirmed and the eastern boundary is established as originally filed." She breathed. "Garfield," she said, "didn't even need to get far into his testimony," Ethan said. "The commissioner saw the filing dates, and that was most of it." He crossed the yard toward her. "He said the commissioner said that whoever organized that file had done it correctly." She looked at him. "Good," she said. "Clara," he said. He stopped 2 feet from her. He was close enough that she could see the exact quality of the look on his face. The open, present, specific look, and something about his proximity in this moment was different from every other moment he'd stood near her, because he wasn't moving past her, wasn't moving to the barn, or the house, or the next task. He had stopped. Specifically here. Specifically in front of her. "What?" she said. "I want to say something," he said. "And I want to say it clearly because I don't. I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean, and I don't want there to be any confusion about what I mean." She was very still. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "When you came here," he said, "I thought you'd last 2 weeks, maybe 3. I've had help before, and it was always people came, and the ranch was still just a place, just land." He paused. "And then you reorganized the pantry." She blinked. "The pantry," she said. "The pantry," he said. "And you fixed the chair without telling me. And you pulled the weeds in my mother's garden." He looked at his hands for a second, then back up at her. "And I'd been here for 4 years, and I didn't know I was profitable. I didn't know there was a land challenge. I didn't know the creek access was at risk. I was running this place in the dark, and I didn't..." He stopped. I didn't know how dark it was until you started turning lights on. Her throat had gone tight. She kept her face still. Years of practice. That's the job, she said. That's what you hired me to do. I hired you to cook, he said. Clara, I hired you to cook and clean the house. I didn't hire you to fix my accounts and fight my land cases and stand up to Miriam Lawson in my sitting room. He held her gaze. You did those things because you saw they needed doing. Because you're the kind of person who sees what needs doing and does it regardless of whether it's your job or your territory or your fight. He paused. I've never had someone in my corner the way you've been in my corner. She couldn't hold the stillness anymore. Not dramatically, just a slight softening of her face, the tightness in her throat, becoming something she acknowledged rather than suppressed. Ethan, she said. I'm not finished, he said. She went quiet. He took a breath. He squared himself. I've been alone on this ranch for 4 years because I stopped believing that someone would come and see it clearly, he said. See it for what it is, not for what they wanted it to be. Not for what it represented to them. Just see it. He looked at her. And then you came, and you saw it. You saw the bad ledgers, and the overgrown garden, and the broken chair, and the scared horse, and you didn't run from any of it. You just started fixing things. Clara's hands were at her sides, and her eyes were dry, but something behind them was not. And then I stopped being scared that you'd leave, he said quietly. And that was the worst of it. Because the moment I stopped being scared you'd leave was the moment I understood what it would mean if you did. She looked at him. What would it mean? She said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. Everything, he said. Simple word. He used simple words and meant them all the way through. I'm not going to leave, she said. I know, he said. You told me you were staying. I believe you. He took one step toward her, closing the last of the distance between them, and he lifted his hand and then stopped a question in the gesture, a held breath in it. She gave him the answer by not stepping back. His hand came to her face, the calloused, scarred, steady hand of a man who worked this land and held her jaw with a tenderness that had the same quality as everything he did. Precise, deliberate, meaning exactly what it meant. I've been keeping everything at a distance for a long time, he said. I don't want to keep you at a distance. She put her hand over his. She held it there. Then don't, she said. What happened between them after that was not dramatic. It was not a sweep or a declaration or a moment designed for an audience. It was simply two people who had been alone for a long time and had found each other in the particular way that real things are found gradually, and then all at once. He kissed her once simply, and it had the same quality as the first cup of coffee he'd set at her elbow, without asking, given without condition, certain of itself. And then Rory came around the corner of the barn, loudly enough to give them substantial warning, which Clara would always privately suspect was not accidental, and the moment folded into the afternoon, and the rest of the day came in around them, as ordinary days will. But the afternoon was different. Dinner was different. The sound of the house was different. Not louder. Not more decorated. Just warmer. The particular warmth of a thing that has been wanting to happen, and has finally happened, and now can stop holding its breath. Rory ate 3 helpings and said nothing, which Clara thought showed considerable restraint. 2 days later. Ethan came into the kitchen in the morning and poured his coffee, and then set something on the table beside her account book. She looked at it. A small box. Old wood, the kind her mother used for buttons. She looked at him. Open it, he said. She opened it. Inside, on a fold of cloth, was a ring. Plain gold. Not ornate. The kind of ring that said, I mean this and nothing more. She looked at it for a long moment. She thought about a kitchen table in Willow Creek and a train ticket placed down like a verdict. She thought about her sister's bright laugh and her father's assessing eyes. She thought about the word that had been used to describe her all her life, unwanted, unsuitable, impossible. And she thought about a man who had read her supply list like it mattered and folded it into his pocket like it was worth keeping. She looked up at him. He was watching her with the steadiest, clearest look he had. "I'm not a man who does this without meaning it," he said. "I meant what I said in the yard. I mean this." He paused. "But I want you to choose it. Not because your father sent you here. Not because you don't have somewhere else to go. Because you want it. Because you want this. All of it." "I already told you I was staying," she said. "Staying is one thing," he said. "This is another." She looked at the ring. She thought about what she'd said to Delia. "It'll be my mistake. That's new." She picked up the ring. She held it in her hand for a moment, the weight of it, the plainness of it, the absolute sincerity of it. She put it on. She looked at him. "I want all of it," she said. He breathed. The steadiness in his face didn't break, but something behind it released like a thing that had been held tightly can finally be set down. He sat down across from her at the kitchen table. She pushed the account book to the side. She poured him a second cup of coffee, and they sat together in the morning kitchen in the particular quiet of two people who have stopped being afraid of what they feel. And outside the window, the ranch stretched out under the summer sky, and the east pasture fence ran straight and clear and undisputed to the creek, and June moved easy in the paddock, and everything that had been broken was not yet all the way healed, but was healing steadily, the way honest things heal, not in a day, but without stopping. The ring changed things in ways Clara hadn't anticipated. Not between her and Ethan that stayed exactly as it had been, which was to say, honest and steady, and increasingly easy in the way of two people who have stopped managing themselves around each other. Between them, the ring was simply the named version of something that had already been true. What changed was everything else. Rory found out at breakfast the morning after when Clara reached across the table for the coffee pot and the ring caught the light and Rory's mouth stopped working mid-sentence about the north fence. He stared at her hand. He looked at Ethan. He looked back at her hand. "Well," he said. "Eat your breakfast," Ethan said. Rory ate his breakfast with the expression of someone who had witnessed something historically significant and was processing the weight of it. "Does this mean you're staying?" he said finally. "She's staying," Ethan said. "Permanently." "Rory," Ethan said. "I'm just confirming," Rory said. He looked at Clara. "Are you staying permanently?" "I'm staying permanently," Clara said. Rory picked up his fork. He went back to his eggs. He was quiet for about 10 seconds. "Good," he said. And then very quietly with his eyes on his plate, "I was worried you'd leave." Clara looked at him. This boy who had been making himself scarce in the evenings for 6 weeks, who had driven her to town without complaint, who had brought back her supply list items with the careful thoroughness of someone who understood the importance of getting small things right. "I'm not leaving," she said. He nodded. He ate. His ears were red. Ethan caught her eye across the table. She looked back down at her coffee. The morning went on. The word got to Harlan Creek before they told anyone, which was the way of small territories where the land was wide and the news traveled faster than the horses that carried it. By the time Ethan went to town for the week's supply run, Ballard knew, and Mrs. Granger knew, and 2 of the seasonal hands knew, and the woman at the dress shop, who had sized Clara by description, had told everyone who came in for 3 days. Ethan came home from that supply run and sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Ballard sends his congratulations." "Already," Clara said. "Mrs. Granger said she knew before the commissioner's ruling." Clara looked at him. "She said she knew at the social," he said. "When I found you across the room." He paused. "She said I looked for you like I already knew where you were." Clara was quiet for a moment. "She's perceptive," she said. "She's nosy," Ethan said, but the ghost smile was there. She turned back to the stove. She felt the warmth of the kitchen, and the warmth of the moment, and the warmth of the ring on her hand, and she let all 3 of them sit inside her at once, without trying to be careful with any of them. She was learning what it felt like to stop bracing. The letter from her father arrived 6 days after the ring. She saw the handwriting on the envelope and set it on the corner of the desk and went about her morning and came back to it when she was ready, which was after the accounts were done, and June had been given her morning grain, and the bread was in the oven. She picked it up and broke the seal and read it standing at the kitchen window. It was short. Her father was not a man of long letters. He was a man of positions stated clearly and not dwelled upon. I understand you are to be married. I will say that I did not anticipate this outcome when I sent you to Harlan County. I will also say that Ethan Callahan is a name known here as a man of standing. Your mother and I wish you well. That was all. No apology. No acknowledgement of the wagon in the yard. The things said in the yard. The word that had been used by Delia. The word that had been used by Pruitt. The word that had been used by all of Willow Creek for 26 years. No acknowledgement that the outcome he hadn't anticipated had happened not despite her, but because of her. She folded the letter. She stood at the window for a moment. She thought about being 15 with the ledger. She thought about the kitchen table where she'd eaten 1,000 meals and never once been asked what she wanted for supper. She thought about her mother's voice, soft carrying no correction, and her sister's bright laugh and her father's face, when he looked at her as though she were a problem he'd inherited rather than a person he'd made. She thought about all of it. Then she put the letter in the kitchen drawer and went to check the bread. She was not going to spend this morning on Franklin Whitmore. She had better things to spend it on. When Ethan came in for the noon meal, she told him about the letter. She told it the same way she told him everything plainly without dramatizing. He listened. He looked at the table. He didn't apologize, he said. No, she said. Are you all right with that? She thought about it genuinely, because he was asking genuinely, and he deserved a genuine answer. I used to think an apology would fix something, she said. I used to think if I could just make them see, make them say it. She set a plate in front of him. But I don't think an apology from my father would change anything that's already happened, and I don't think it would change what's going to happen. She sat down across from him. I'd rather have this than have his apology. I'd rather have Redstone and the accounts and June and Rory and... She stopped. She looked at him. And you. I'd rather have all of that than the right words from a man who didn't know what he had when he sent me away. Ethan looked at her. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. He didn't know, he said. I know. She turned her hand over under his. She held it. I know you do, she said. They ate lunch. The bread was good. Outside, Rory was working the paddock, and June was being patient with him in the way she'd become patient with the people she trusted, which was a short and carefully chosen list, and Clara found that particular. 3 weeks after the commissioner's ruling, Gerald Lawson formally withdrew the boundary challenge. Ethan got the notice from the county clerk in Harlan Creek and brought it home and set it on the kitchen table without ceremony. Clara read it. She set it down. She looked at him. Good, she said. He added a note, Ethan said. He pointed to the bottom of the document. She read the note. Gerald Lawson, in the careful language of a man writing through a lawyer, expressed that the challenge had been filed in error, and that he hoped the matter would be considered closed, and that relations between neighboring landowners might remain cordial. Clara set the paper down. Relations between neighboring landowners, she said. Ethan said. He bought the parcel in his wife's name and sat on a fraudulent land challenge for 3 years, she said. And he hopes relations might remain cordial. He does, Ethan said. She looked at the note. File it, she said. Keep it with the other documents, in case he ever hopes for anything again. Ethan picked up the paper. He looked at her. You're harder than you look, he said. I've had to be, she said. He filed it. The wedding was held in September, which in Harlan County was still summer in everything but name, the grass still holding its color, the sky still wide and blue, the mornings cool and the afternoons warm in the way that made everything feel like it had enough time. They married at the Harlan Creek Church, which was small and practical, and had been built by the same families who'd built most things in the county. Mrs. Granger stood up for Clara, which she'd offered to do 3 weeks before the wedding, with the same blunt directness she brought to everything. You need someone, she'd said. I'm someone, and I want to see his face when you walk in. Clara had said yes. Rory stood up for Ethan, which had made Rory so proud that he'd spent 2 full days practicing standing up straight. which Clara found both endearing and slightly heartbreaking, in the way that boys being given responsibility for the first time were always a little heartbreaking. Clara wore the blue dress, the one Ethan had sent to town for the one Mrs. Delmar had sized from a description of a woman who worked hard and didn't fuss. She had pressed it herself and let it hang overnight, and it fit the way good things fit when they were made for you, which it hadn't been exactly, and yet was in the way that mattered. She had no mirror in her room adequate for the job of seeing herself. She knew this. She went to the morning of her own wedding without looking at her reflection, because she had spent enough of her life looking at herself through other people's eyes and finding herself wanting. Today she was not going to do that. Today she was going to walk into the church and be exactly what she was, a woman who had worked hard and kept good books and fixed broken things and stood up for herself when standing up had cost something, and that was going to be enough. That was going to be more than enough. Mrs. Granger picked her up in her buggy and drove her to the church. "You look well," Mrs. Granger said. The word "well" in Mrs. Granger's vocabulary was not a small word. "Thank you," Clara said. "He's been there since 8:30, Mrs. Granger said. "It's not yet 9. Clara looked at the road. "Has he?" she said. "Rory said he woke up before 4 and didn't go back to sleep." Mrs. Granger's voice was level. "In my experience, a man who can't sleep the night before his wedding is a man who wants very much to get to the other side of it." Clara breathed. "I want very much to get to the other side of it," she said. "I know," Mrs. Granger said. "That's why I'm driving fast." The church was not full. It was a small wedding, and they had told no one from Willow Creek, and the attendees were the people who had come to know Clara in the months at Redstone and in Harlan Creek, which was fewer people than a crowd, but more than she'd expected. Ballard was there. Garfield had made the trip down from Billings. Two of the older ranching families sat in the back pews with the quiet approval of people who had known Ethan's parents and were glad to see the land in good hands. She walked in. He was at the front of the church, standing with the same posture he brought to everything. Straight steady, taking up exactly the space he needed and no more. He had his good coat on and his hat in his hands, and he was looking at the door. He saw her, and his face, his composed, careful, controlled face, did something she had not seen it do before. Not the ghost smile, not the deep look. Something bigger than both of those. Something that a man who kept everything close to the chest could not keep close in this particular moment, in this particular light, looking at this particular woman, walking toward him in a blue dress that had been chosen for her by someone who finally saw her. She walked toward him, and she did not look away. She was done looking away. When she reached him, he put out his hand and she took it, and his grip was steady and warm and certain the same way he did everything, and she held it back with the same certainty, and they stood together in front of the small congregation, and the minister who had known the Callahan family for 30 years, and looked between them with the expression of a man who had done many weddings, and could tell the difference between a couple going through a ceremony and two people who had already decided everything that mattered. The minister asked his questions. They answered them. When he came to the part where Ethan was to speak his promise, Ethan looked at Clara, the open, full look, and said the words in a voice that carried no performance, no decoration, only the plain and total weight of a man who meant every syllable of what he was saying. And when it was her turn, Clara looked back at him and said her words in the clear, steady voice of a woman who had spent 26 years being told she wasn't worth choosing, and had spent the last 4 months discovering inch by inch that that was a lie. She said the words like they were facts, because they were. They rode back to Redstone in the afternoon with Rory driving the wagon and talking continuously about the cake Mrs. Granger had brought, and the autumn light coming across the land in the particular gold of September that made everything it touched look like it had been there forever. Clara sat beside Ethan on the wagon seat. His hand found hers and held it. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Rory was filling all available silence with cake commentary, and the land was doing what it always did, being exactly itself, wide and patient and indifferent to the small human dramas that played out against it, and in that indifference somehow consoling. When the wagon came around the long bend and the ranch came into view, Clara felt the thing she always felt now when she saw it. The particular settling that happens in a person's body when they see the place that belongs to them and that they belong to. Not pride exactly. Something quieter. Something closer to yes. This. Ethan squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. The months that followed were not without difficulty, because no honest life is without difficulty, and Clara would not have trusted a version of things that was. There was a hard autumn drier than expected. The creek running lower than Ethan liked, a section of the north fence going down in a wind that cost 2 days' work and 4 head of cattle that wandered before they were recovered. There was a disagreement in November that was real and sat between them for a full day before they talked it through, which they did in the kitchen plainly and without cruelty, and came out the other side of it with something more solid than they'd had going in. There was a letter from Delia in October, not from her father, from Delia, that surprised Clara with its tone. Less bright, less armored. Something in it that was trying in the clumsy way of a person who has not practiced trying to reach across the distance. Clara wrote back. She wrote carefully. She wrote honestly. She didn't forgive everything in one letter, because forgiveness isn't a letter, it's a practice, and she was just beginning the practice. But she wrote. She left the door open. That felt like enough for now. In November, Rory told Ethan he wanted to learn to keep books. He said it at supper with his ears going red and his eyes aimed at his plate in the way of a boy who has rehearsed something and is committed to getting through it. Clara said the accounts are what keeps the ranch safe, he said. She said if you know your numbers, you can't be caught by surprise. I want to know the numbers. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at Rory. All right, she said. Monday morning after the cattle check. Bring your best attention. Rory's ears went redder. Yes, ma'am, he said. She taught him. They sat at the kitchen table every Monday and Wednesday morning, and she went through the principles, the way she wished someone had gone through them with her, not as a chore, not as something barely worth mentioning, but as the serious and necessary craft it was. She showed him how entries connected to each other. She showed him how errors compounded if you didn't catch them early. She showed him how to read the shape of a month's figures and know whether it was running right, how was to her private delight genuinely good at it. He had the same instinct, she had the instinct for the thing that didn't fit the figure that sat wrong in its column. She told him so the third week, and he looked at her with such open surprise that something in her chest tightened. Nobody ever told me I was good at anything, he said. Then immediately went red and looked at the ledger. I know what you mean, she said. And you are. Keep going. He kept going. December brought the first real snow, and with it a stillness on the ranch that was different from the summer quiet, thicker, more complete. The cattle were brought to the winter pasture. The garden was put to bed. The firewood that Rory had been stacking since October turned out to be exactly enough, which Clara knew because she had calculated it in September, which was a satisfaction she allowed herself to feel. On a December evening with the snow coming down outside, and the stove doing its job and the house warm and particular, and full of the small sounds of people living in it. Ethan came and sat beside her on the settle, rather than across from her at the table. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire. You know what Garfield said to me? He said, the day after the commissioner ruled. What? She said. He said he looked at everything you'd organized, and he said, Callahan, that woman is the best thing that ever happened to this land. He paused. I told him she was the best thing that ever happened to me. Clara looked at the fire. What did he say? She said. He said those are usually the same thing, Ethan said. She thought about that. He's right, she said. Ethan looked at her. Are you happy? He said. She thought about this question, the way she thought about all real questions, carefully, without rushing, wanting to give it the accurate answer rather than the easy one. Yes, she said. And then because it was him and he deserved the whole of it, I didn't know what it felt like. I thought I did. I thought I understood what happiness was supposed to feel like from the outside, the description of it. But I didn't know what it felt like from the inside. She looked at her hands, at the ring on her hand. It feels like this, Like being somewhere that knows your name. Like doing work that matters. Like someone looking for you across a room and finding you right away. I was very still beside her. Like being seen, she said. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him. Outside, the snow came down steady and covering, and the ranch went quiet under it, and the fire held the room, and June was warm in the barn, and Rory was asleep upstairs, and the accounts were correct in the ledger on the desk, and everything that had been broken was not broken anymore. In the spring, Clara's father came to Redstone. He came without announcement, which was his way, and without Delia, which surprised her, and he stood in the yard on an April morning with his hat in his hands, and a look on his face that she had never seen there before in 27 years. He looked old. Not frail. Franklin Whitmore would not permit frailty, but old in the way of a man who has carried a particular weight for long enough that the carrying has become visible. She came out to the yard when she heard the wagon. She stood on the porch steps and looked at him. He looked at her. He looked at the house behind her. The porch boards replaced the shutters straight, the kitchen garden visible at the side already coming up. He looked at the paddock where June moved easy and sure. He looked at the barn, the fence lines, the land. He looked at his daughter. "You did all this," he said. "Ethan and I did," she said. He nodded. He turned his hat in his hands. "Clara," he said, and then he stopped. She waited. She had learned from Ethan that silence was not an enemy of honesty. That sometimes a person needed to find their way to the true thing without being hurried. "I thought—" He stopped again. He looked at his hat. "I thought I was solving a problem. When I sent you here, I thought I was managing a situation." He looked up. "I didn't think about what it meant. To you. I didn't think about whether it—" He stopped a third time. "Whether it hurt," she said. "Yes," he said. "Whether it hurt." The morning was warm and clear, and the birds were doing what April birds do, which is to say, everything at once, and the sounds of the ranch were all around them, the cattle, the horses, the particular creak of the windmill Ethan had repaired in February. "It did," she said. "It hurt. For a long time." She looked at him steadily. "And I'm here because of it, which is complicated. I don't know how to sort that out exactly. I've stopped trying." He looked at her. "Are you—" He seemed to be choosing the right word carefully. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said. "Truly. Truly," she said. "More than all right. More than I've ever been." He breathed. Something in his shoulders changed. "I should have," he started. "Papa," she said. He stopped. "You don't have to finish that sentence today," she said. "You can come in and have coffee and meet Ethan properly and see the ranch. That can be enough for today." He looked at her for a long moment, and then for the first time in her memory, for the first time she could ever recall in 27 years of being his daughter. Franklin. Whitmore looked at Clara. Whitmore Callahan with something clear and uncomplicated in his face. It was not quite apology. It was something prior to apology, the recognition that had to come before the words could mean anything. The seeing. "All right," he said. She stepped off the porch and went to him, and she led him inside. Ethan was at the kitchen table with his coffee and his morning schedule, and he stood when they came in and shook Franklin's hand with the same direct steadiness he brought to everything. And Franklin looked at him the way he looked at all men assessing, and something in the assessment seemed to settle him. Clara put water on. She set out cups. She sat at the table in her kitchen in her house on her land, and she poured coffee for her husband and her father, and she was steady, and she was present, and she was in all the ways that counted exactly where she was supposed to be. On a warm evening in May, the kind of May evening that Montana produces when it has decided to be generous. Clara was in the kitchen garden when Ethan came and leaned against the fence and watched her work. She knew he was there. She kept working. After a while he said, "Rory got the August accounts right, all the way through." "I know," she said. "I checked them." "He said you didn't tell him they were right." She sat back on her heels and looked up at him. "I'm going to tell him Monday," she said. "I wanted him to sit with the uncertainty for 2 days first. It's good practice." Ethan looked at her. "You're going to make him a good rancher," he said. "I'm going to make him a man who understands his numbers," she said. "What he does with that is up to him." He was quiet. She went back to her work. "My mother's garden," he said. "Yes," she said. "She'd have liked you," he said. He said it simply. "She'd have sat at this fence and watched you work, and she'd have said you were the kind of person she'd been hoping would come to this land." He paused. She talked about that. About the ranch needing the right person, not the right worker, the right person. Clara looked at the garden, at the tomatoes coming up strong, at the beans climbing the repaired trellis, at the herbs she'd planted along the south edge that were already spreading the way. Good things spread when they're given the right soil. "I feel that," she said. "Like the land knows me." "It does," he said. She stood up. She walked to the fence and stood beside him and looked at the ranch, the whole of it, the land and the animals and the buildings and the east pasture running down to the creek where the boundary held firm and legal and undisputed. Ethan turned to look at her. "You know what I thought," he said, "the morning you fixed that chair, the broken chair in the kitchen corner." "What?" she said. "I thought she's going to stay," he said. "I didn't know why I thought it. You'd only been here 2 days. But you fixed the chair and you didn't say anything about it, and I walked in and sat in it and it held. And I thought she sees what needs doing, and she does it." He looked at the land. "I thought this is what the ranch has been waiting for." Clara looked at him. "The ranch," she said. He looked back at her. "And me," he said. She held his gaze. "You were worth waiting for," she said. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The same gesture he'd been making since November, small and certain, and she leaned slightly into it, the way she leaned into all the things he gave her with her whole self, without reservation. "We both were," he said. The evening came in around them warm and unhurried, and the ranch held them in it, and Clara Whitmore Callahan stood on her own land beside her own husband, and looked at the life she had built with her own hands, from the materials of a joke, a train ticket placed down like a verdict, a father who thought he was solving a problem, a town that had decided she was impossible, and understood something that she would carry with her for the rest of her days. The world had looked at her and seen nothing worth keeping. One man had looked at her and seen everything. And she had looked at herself finally clearly in the mirror of a life that fit and seen that they were both right. That she was nothing to the people who had never truly seen her, and that she was everything to the person who had. The woman no one chose had chosen herself, and that in the end was where every real story begins.